My boss stole my breast milk for his protein shakes. So I convinced him he was dying. I stood up in the middle of our dead silent, open plan office and looked my 6'2" sales director dead in the eye. Brad, my doctor just called with my lab results, and the breast milk you stole from the fridge and drank this morning is laced with highly toxic bacterial medication, I said, my voice carrying over 50 cubicles. You need to go to the ER right now before your liver shuts down. The sheer, suffocating silence that fell over the sales floor in that moment was something I will remember for the rest of my life. Keyboards stopped clacking. Headsets were slowly lowered to desks. But to understand how I ended up publicly executing a high-level executive's career on a random Tuesday, you have to understand the pure, unadulterated hell of returning to corporate America as a new, pumping mother. My son, Leo, was barely 4 months old when my unpaid maternity leave ran out. Coming back to the office was a physical and psychological marathon. My body was still healing, my brain was severely sleep-deprived, and my chest constantly felt like it was filled with crushed glass. Twice a day, at 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., I had to pack up my heavy, awkward pump bag, walk past rows of staring colleagues, and lock myself in the wellness room, which was really just a repurposed supply closet that still smelled faintly of industrial bleach and old mop water. I would sit on a hard plastic folding chair under flickering fluorescent lights, hook myself up to a machine that made a relentless, droning mechanical sound, and sacrifice 30 minutes of my workday to make sure my baby had food. Every drop of that milk was a labor of love, sweat, and physical pain. I treated those opaque, medical-grade Lancino bags like they were filled with crushed diamonds. I would carefully seal them, write the exact date, time, and ounce count on the top in thick black Sharpie, and place them in the very back corner of the communal breakroom fridge, tucked safely inside an insulated grey cooler bag. For the first 2 weeks, it was a grueling but functional routine. Then came a bleak Monday afternoon. I finished my 3 p.m. pumping session, walked into the breakroom, unzipped my cooler bag to add the fresh batch, and my stomach plummeted into my shoes. The 2 bags I had pumped that morning were gone. At first, my sleep-deprived brain refused to accept the reality of the situation. I frantically tore the fridge apart. I moved people's moldy Tupperware containers, shifted around half-empty bottles of Diet Coke, and practically crawled inside the crisper drawer. Nothing. I felt the heat rising in my neck and my vision went blurry with panic. Had I forgotten to put them in? Had I thrown them away by mistake? I spent the rest of the afternoon questioning my own sanity, quietly weeping in my car on the drive home because I had to supplement Leo's night feed with formula. 2 days later, it happened again. I placed a fresh, 6-ounce bag into my cooler at 10 a.m. When I returned at 3 p.m., the zipper of the cooler was slightly parted, and the bag was completely missing. This wasn't an accident. Someone in this building was actively hunting for my breast milk. I marched straight down to the Human Resources Department. My hands were trembling with a mixture of profound violation and maternal rage. I sat across from Brenda, a woman whose entire personality consisted of corporate buzzwords and conflict avoidance. I explained exactly what was happening, expecting outrage. Instead, she offered me a placating, deeply condescending smile. "Charlotte, I completely understand why you're stressed," Brenda sighed, lacing her fingers together. "But let's assume positive intent here. Maybe someone mistook it for coffee creamer. Or perhaps the cleaning staff threw it out thinking it was expired milk. I'll send out a gentle reminder to the floor. Brenda, it's stored inside a sealed, personal cooler bag, and the bags are heavily printed with medical measurements," I hissed, leaning over her desk. "Nobody is mistaking human breast milk for French vanilla coffee mate." An hour later, Brenda sent out the most toothless, pathetic company-wide email I had ever read. Subject: refrigerator etiquette. The body of the email simply asked everyone to respect the communal space and refrain from borrowing items that do not belong to you. It didn't mention theft. It didn't mention breast milk. It was a cowardly slap on the wrist to a ghost. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to a pharmacy on my lunch break and bought a pack of industrial-grade, neon red warning stickers. The next morning, I covered my milk bags in labels. I wrote Charlotte's breast milk, biological hazard, do not touch in thick permanent marker across both sides of the plastic. I placed the bags directly into the fridge without the cooler, making them impossible to ignore. They survived exactly one day. By Friday afternoon, a neon-labeled bag was missing again. I sat in my cubicle, staring blankly at my computer monitor, feeling a level of violation that made me physically nauseous. Who was doing this? Was it some twisted creep getting a thrill out of harassing a new mother? Was it a sick prank? I couldn't focus. I couldn't work. Every time a male coworker walked past my desk, my skin crawled. But I am not the kind of woman who suffers in silence. If corporate bureaucracy was going to protect a predator, I was going to catch him myself. The following Monday, I brought an old, deactivated iPhone from home. I fully charged it, wiped its memory, and set it to record video. Before anyone arrived at the office, I slipped into the break room at 7 a.m. I placed the phone in the very back of the top shelf of the fridge, propped up against a giant, communal tub of mayonnaise, with the camera lens perfectly angled to capture anyone opening the door. I covered the body of the phone with a strategically placed box of baking soda. Then, I placed my freshly pumped, neon-labeled bag of milk front and center on the middle shelf. I spent the next 4 hours at my desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every time I saw someone walk toward the break room, my breath hitched. By noon, I couldn't take the suspense anymore. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and looked at the middle shelf. The milk was gone. I quickly reached past the mayonnaise, grabbed my decoy phone, shoved it into my pocket, and practically sprinted to the privacy of the wellness room. I locked the door, sat on the hard plastic chair, and pulled up the video gallery. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely tap the screen. I scrolled through hours of mundane footage. A woman from accounting grabbing a yogurt. The receptionist putting away a salad. A junior analyst grabbing a LaCroix. And then, at exactly 9:45 a.m., the fridge door swung open, and the frame was filled with the broad, muscular chest of Brad, our sales director. Brad was the walking embodiment of toxic gym bro culture. He was a 35-year-old walking steroid who constantly talked about his macros, carried around a massive gallon jug of neon blue amino acids, and frequently made unsolicited, condescending comments about the dietary choices of female employees. He was arrogant, untouchable, and brought in millions of dollars in revenue for the company, which meant the executive team let him get away with murder. I watched the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Brad reached into the fridge and grabbed my breast milk. He didn't look confused. He didn't look like he was mistaking it for creamer. He pulled the neon-labeled bag right up to his face, inspecting the date and the ounce count. Then, he reached out of frame and brought back a massive, black plastic protein shaker. He unscrewed the lid, bit off the plastic tab of my milk bag, and poured the entire contents directly into his shaker. He tossed the empty plastic bag into the trash can. As he screwed the lid back onto his shaker, he gave it a vigorous shake, smiled a terrifyingly smug smile, and muttered 2 words under his breath that made my blood run cold. Liquid gold. I sat in that closet for a full hour, my mind racing through a sickening labyrinth of realization. Why? Why would a grown man, an executive, steal breast milk? I pulled out my active phone and fell down a dark, deeply disturbing rabbit hole on Reddit and various bodybuilding forums. That's when the real bombshell dropped. In certain extreme, fringe sectors of the bodybuilding community, human breast milk is rumored to be the ultimate, underground miracle superfood. Forums were filled with meatheads claiming that the dense calories, human growth hormones, and unique nutrient profiles of breast milk caused explosive muscle growth and clean bulking. Brad wasn't a sexual deviant with a weird fetish. He was a narcissistic, muscle-obsessed sociopath who viewed my body, my pain, and my infant son's food supply as his own personal, free supplement stack. He was literally stealing nutrients from a baby to get better bicep pumps. The sheer audacity. The absolute, unhinged entitlement of a man making $250,000 a year, stealing a bodily fluid from a stressed, exhausted working mother just to fuel his gym vanity. I didn't go to Brenda in HR. Brenda would have called a private meeting. Brenda would have talked about misunderstandings and boundary setting. Brad would have gotten a verbal warning, and I would have had to endure his smug, retaliatory behavior for the rest of my career. No. Brad needed to be destroyed. He needed to be publicly, irreversibly dismantled. I spent the entire evening plotting my revenge. I didn't sleep. I rehearsed my lines in the bathroom mirror until my delivery was as cold and clinical as a surgeon's scalpel. The next morning, Tuesday, I arrived at the office early. I pumped a fresh bag of milk, labeled it, and placed it in the fridge. I didn't set up the camera. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what time he would strike. I sat at my desk, watching the clock. 9 a.m. 9:30 a.m. At 9:45 a.m., I saw Brad walk out of the break room, casually sipping from his black plastic shaker bottle, laughing with a junior sales rep as he strolled back to his corner desk in the middle of the open plan office. I waited exactly 15 minutes to let him finish his drink. Then, I stood up. I didn't storm over. I didn't stomp. I walked with a slow, deliberate calmness that practically radiated danger. I stopped right next to his desk. The sales floor was buzzing with the sound of 50 people on client calls, typing, and chatting. "Brad," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. He spun around in his ergonomic chair, still holding his empty shaker. "Charlotte. What's up? Need some closing advice on your accounts?" He smirked, leaning back and lacing his hands behind his head. I didn't lower my voice. In fact, I projected it perfectly, ensuring the acoustic design of the open office carried my words to every single cubicle within a 50-foot radius. "Brad, my doctor just called with my lab results, and the breast milk you stole from the fridge and drank this morning is laced with highly toxic bacterial medication," I said, locking my eyes onto his. "You need to go to the ER right now before your liver shuts down." The transformation of his face was a masterpiece. The arrogant smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his cheeks so rapidly he looked like a corpse. The buzzing of the sales floor abruptly ceased, replaced by a horrifying, collective gasp from our coworkers. What?" he stammered, his voice cracking, his eyes darting around the suddenly silent room. I didn't. I have you on hidden camera pouring my bodily fluids into your protein shaker, Brad. We can deal with the theft later," I commanded, stepping closer to him, my tone dripping with manufactured panic. "Right now, you have ingested a massive dose of a synthetic cephalosporin antibiotic that is highly toxic to adult digestive tracts. It causes acute hepatic failure and severe gastric hemorrhaging. How much did you drink?" Brad started to hyperventilate. Sweat instantly beaded on his forehead. He looked at his empty shaker bottle like it was a live grenade. He grabbed his phone with violently shaking hands and started frantically typing into Google. "I feel sick," he whispered, his eyes wide with genuine terror. "My stomach, it's burning. The human brain is a powerful thing. Tell a man he's been poisoned, and his body will instantly manifest the symptoms of his own panic. You need to induce vomiting, Brad. Now," I demanded. Brad didn't even argue. He shot up out of his chair, knocking his keyboard onto the floor, and sprinted down the main aisle toward the men's restroom. He was moving so fast he shoulder-checked the water cooler. Within seconds, half the office was standing up, peering over their cubicle walls. The silence was broken by the distinct, echoing sounds of violent, agonizing retching coming from down the hall. Our regional manager, a stern man named David, rushed out of his glass office. "What the hell is going on? Why is Brad screaming in the bathroom?" Sarah, the receptionist, looked at David with wide, traumatized eyes. "Charlotte just told him the breast milk he's been stealing from her is poisoned." David looked at me, completely paralyzed. "He's been drinking your, what?" "I need HR and legal in the main conference room." "Immediately," I said, maintaining my icy composure. I turned on my heel and walked toward the glass-walled boardroom, leaving a trail of absolute chaos in my wake. 10 minutes later, the conference room felt like a pressure cooker. Brenda from HR looked like she was going to faint. The company's in-house counsel, a sharp-eyed lawyer named Marcus, was furiously taking notes. David was pacing the length of the room, rubbing his temples. The door clicked open, and Brad was escorted in by a security guard. He looked entirely broken. His designer tie was stained with vomit, his face was pale green, and he was trembling uncontrollably. He collapsed into a chair across from me. I need the name of the medication, Brad begged, his voice a pathetic, wheezing sob. Poison control is on the phone. They need the exact chemical compound. Charlotte, please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, just tell me what I drank. Brenda leaned forward, her corporate mask entirely gone. Brad, are you admitting that you have been consuming Charlotte's breast milk? Yes, okay. It's good for muscle recovery. I read it on a forum, he shrieked, tears actively streaming down his face. I took it. I'm sorry. Just tell me what the medicine is so I don't die. I let him sweat for another 30 seconds. I watched this arrogant, untouchable executive, a man who had belittled female employees for years, completely disintegrate into a puddle of terror and bodily fluids. Then, I reached into my purse, pulled out my primary phone, and slid it across the conference table toward Marcus, the lawyer. There is no medication, I said, my voice dropping back to a calm, conversational volume. I am in perfect health. My son is perfectly healthy. The milk is pristine. The room went dead silent again. Brad stopped crying, his mouth hanging open in a grotesque display of confusion. What? I lied to force a confession, I stated, looking directly at Marcus. I knew HR wouldn't take my complaints seriously, so I engineered a scenario where he would publicly admit to stealing a biological fluid belonging to an infant. Brad's fear instantly morphed into explosive, humiliated rage. He slammed his fists on the table, lunging halfway across the mahogany surface. You psychotic bitch. You lied to me. You made me throw up my breakfast. That's defamation. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole damn company. Marcus, the lawyer, finally spoke up. He didn't look at Brad. He looked at me, a glimmer of profound respect in his eyes. It's not defamation, Brad, Marcus said, his tone dripping with legal finality. Defamation requires a false statement of fact that damages a reputation. Charlotte stated you drank her breast milk. You just confessed, on tape to poison control, and in front of HR, the regional manager, and the company's legal counsel, that you did exactly that. She said I was poisoned. Brad screamed, his veins popping out of his neck. A bluff used to uncover a theft, Marcus countered smoothly. Theft of personal property. Misconduct. Creation of a hostile work environment. And, quite frankly, tampering with food intended for an infant, which dances on the edge of a criminal charge depending on the jurisdiction. The only person whose actions are actionable here is you. Brenda finally found her voice, though it was shaking. We pulled the hallway security footage outside the break room while you were in the restroom, Brad. We have you entering the kitchen at the exact times Charlotte reported the thefts over the last 3 weeks. You are a sales director, David added, looking at Brad with sheer, unadulterated disgust. You represent this company. You have been shaking hands with our top-tier clients moments after stealing and drinking a co-worker's breast milk from the communal fridge. You are a massive, catastrophic liability. Brad was hyperventilating again, realizing that he wasn't dying of poisoning, but his 6-figure career had just been executed with clinical precision. Brad, your employment is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct, Brenda stated, officially pulling the trigger. Security will escort you to your desk to collect your personal items, and then you will leave the premises. Your unvested stock options are forfeit. Brad tried to argue. He tried to claim he had an addiction, that he needed therapy, that the company was discriminating against his dietary lifestyle choices. Marcus simply handed him a termination packet and pointed to the door. Watching him do the walk of shame across the sales floor, carrying a cardboard box filled with his protein powder and amino acids, while 50 co-workers stared at him in utter repulsion, was the most satisfying moment of my professional life. The fallout was swift and permanent. The company didn't just fire Brad, they panicked about liability. By Friday, the maintenance team had installed a brand new, locking mini-fridge in the wellness room, specifically designated for medical.
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.